the former federal prosecutor, now working the defense side of the table. He's David Katz, everybody. Hi, David.
Great to be with you. Kim, welcome
Right.
back. I didn't see you last week. I hope you're much better, Kim.
Yeah, Kim, are you much better?
I am feeling a lot better. Thank you, David Katz. You're so nice. Thank you.
Well, David, I have COVID right now. How about a little sympathy for me?
Oh, my goodness, Mark.
I've got to get this Paxlovid. Guess how much they want for the Paxlovid, David Katz? $500. I mean, I'm just a little guy with a YouTube show.
Hey, which one do you use, Mark Thompson?
Yeah, I'm not supposed to go up with that kind of money. So, and then Kim tells me the Paxlovid is almost worse than COVID. So, anyway, so you're up to date on those of us with COVID and those of us who are just getting COVID. Now,
I'm sorry to hear that, Mark.
Thank you, pal. I couldn't stand to see Kim get all of the sympathy. I had to grab some for myself. So thank you. I want to start with a very high-profile deal that was made with these guys in Guantanamo to avoid the death penalty. These are the 9/11 plotters. They say the self-confessed, that is to say, professed plotters, the mastermind, this Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and two others. Can you speak to this? Has been going on for decades now, right? Since, I think more or less 20 years, something like that?
Well, KSM, as he's known, was actually found in Pakistan in 2003. But there were warrants for his arrest for planning airplane bombings way back in the 90s. And there's stories of the FBI agent who chased him. He actually chased him to Qatar. Qatar said they lost him. He didn't get him back from Qatar. And then years later, of course, he did this absolute atrocity. You know, there's this huge debate about the death penalty. And when that debate takes place, people always conjure up somebody other than Hitler who they think, Osama bin Laden, you don't think that person deserves the death penalty. And if you're going to conjure up that debate, here's KSM, who, went out of his way to plot and be the architect of 3 million Americans dying. There's also thousands and thousands of people who have cancer-related problems on account of the site in New York City. All the toxins that were released. So this fellow is absolutely an avowed mass murderer. Apparently, a huge attention seeker. Shows absolutely no remorse. But the problem is the case, as you indicated, has been kicking around since 9/11. That was 23 years ago almost. And the case has not moved forward for many, many reasons that we can get into. One of them was that they were talking about trying him in a civilian court, not in a military court in Guantanamo, but the Department of Justice trying him in New York City. And believe it or not, there was a huge outcry. It's like nobody wanted this trial in their backyard, even given what the stakes were, even the horrible things that were alleged in this case. It's him and 4 co-defendants. Apparently, one of them is his nephew who did not take this deal. I don't know exactly what they're going to do with the 5th one who didn't take the deal. There's one who was found mentally incompetent to stand trial. And then there's KSM, and there's 2 co-defendants who would apparently be taking this deal and entering some sort of guilty plea next week and agreeing to these terms, which are secret. There has not been transparency about it, Mark. But the main deal is that they would not suffer the threat of the death penalty, the 3 of them.
The one thing that hasn't been secret is some published reports of waterboarding of prisoners and the torture. And that is not nothing, because that stuff has muddied the water on these guys. Isn't that right, David?
Well, absolutely. And of course, there's an embarrassment and worse to the United States from airing this all out in court. This would be a military court because there was no appetite in the end to try it in a civilian court. So it's going to be at Guantanamo in a military court. It's actually the Department of Defense that handles the case, not the Department of Justice, because it's the military justice system. But yes, the waterboarding would come out. Apparently the KSM was waterboarded 180 sometimes. I think all intelligent people who don't have a dog in the race thinks, of course, waterboarding is torture. And he was told they were going to kill his family, according to the allegations. He was waterboarded. He thought he was going to drown. They made him sit around a naked position, torture, all that kind of stuff. My point is just that if there's fruit of torture, obviously the fruit of the torture should not come in. But at least my understanding of KSM is they had a perfectly good, valid case against him by more than a reasonable doubt. before he was ever tortured or waterboarded. And generally under our rules, if there's what they call fruit of the poisonous tree, if the police did something unconscionable, illegal, unconstitutional, we don't allow the fruit of that to come in, but we do allow the existing evidence before the torture took place, before the waterboarding came in. Now, if he implicated one of the other people, part of not allowing in the fruit of the poisonous tree was we would not allow in what KSM said under torture against any other co-defendant. But my understanding is that they have a pretty solid case against them too. And of course, some of the family members are absolutely screaming and saying that they want them to get the death penalty. And the biggest hypocrite, in my opinion, one of the great clowns in this act is, of course, McConnell in the Senate, who just came out and said, oh my God, how is this happening? Why are they going so light on these people? Let me remind everybody that when W was the president, and then later on, when Trump was the president, the Republicans controlled the Senate and the House. And there was no appetite for apparently moving this case along, getting it to a civilian court, imposing the death penalty on these folks. So it's easy for them to say now, oh my goodness, why did the Department of Defense make this deal? But there are some reasons. The case has been kicking around, Mark, as you said, since 9/11, and he's been in custody for 23 years. Some people will ask, well, isn't there a speedy trial part of our Constitution? Isn't there something like that? My understanding is it's in the Department of Defense. But obviously, they would have brought all those motions. Apparently, there's 35,000 pages just of transcripts for any judge coming into this case to read. Jeez. There's dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds and hundreds of motions. And that's a whole other problem in the case. There apparently have been 8 or 9 different military judges on this case. I have no idea why the military system can't keep some judge on this case and say, look, keep going through with this. And finally, there's the problem of the lawyers. You might say, who in their right mind would want to be the lawyer? What American lawyer would want to be the lawyer for KSM? But, it's a celebrated case. I think they're paid and appointed by the court. They gave them a huge runaround, and worse than that, in Guantanamo. They would drive around the lawyers. Then they put all these crazy protective orders on them. If someone had called me and said, David Katz, this is the case of a lifetime, would you take it? I would not have taken that case. But some attorneys took that case, and they've run with it. And of course, that's controversial. But everyone, even this KSM, everyone is entitled to a criminal defense. But some people think, wow, it's amazing that this one didn't end in the death penalty at the end, at least for KSM. Anyone who believes in the death penalty, I think this is the guy they have in mind for who it should be imposed on. Even if it's imposed very, very rarely, they think this is the guy.
The plea negotiations have been underway for over 2 years, it's noted here. The 3 men also agreed to a process to respond to questions submitted by family members of victims regarding their roles and reasons for conducting the September 11th attack. Family members may be able to testify during sentencing hearings, which will start in the summer of 2025 at the earliest, according to this agreement. But there are a lot of family members who are really frustrated here, and they feel, as I've read the statements from family members, they just feel as though justice delayed, is justice denied. I mean, that this thing has gone on so long, and it's been brutal for everybody. You mentioned the lawyers, you mentioned the defendants, you mentioned sort of the process and how frustrating it is. And for family who lost so many loved ones in the 9/11 attack, it's been frustrating for them as well.
Oh, absolutely, Mark. And, some of the details of the agreement, I mean, to me, I think a lot of it's really a sop. And I think that, what's really going on is that, would they have actually faced the death penalty? Would this thing have gone on another 10 or 20 years, spend an awful lot of money on it? Have these people been on the roller coaster that they're frustrated right now? How frustrated would they be in 10 years? So there's an argument for resolving it. And obviously what the 3 of them wanted was to not get the death penalty. Life is dear. People hold continuing to live dear, even in the confinement and bad conditions and worse at Guantanamo. So that was obviously something that they wanted. And I think that what the government wanted here was some kind of closure, after all of this time. But I think all this other stuff, they're going to answer questions. These 3, leaders of the 9/11 plot, because this guy really was the architect. I mean, good reporting has revealed, Mark, that he basically had this idea. He told Osama bin Laden this idea, but this was KSM's brainchild. He's an American educated engineer who came up with this awful plot and basically sold it to Osama bin Laden, trained the people. As I say, they apparently have enormous evidence against him before he was ever waterboarded, this KSM. But whether he's going to say, why he did it, okay, so that in a month, he's going to answer, I did it because I hate the West. The West screwed over Islam. It screwed over the Middle East, and I wanted revenge. I think we kind of knew that. If you read The Looming Tower, that great book, The Looming Tower, I think you kind of know what his answers are going to be. And they're going to make a victim impact statement. I mean, of course, that's a sop. That's absolutely, righteous. But we know the victim impact statement. It's been awful. We've lived with it since 9/11 and shared the suffering and pain and dismay and everything else. I mean, it's important that they speak in court, but a lot of them are going to say, I wanted these people to get the death penalty. That's my victim impact statement. And that's not going to happen. And Mark, I'm really not taking a side in the whole thing, because I do see both sides of it. But what's interesting is that apparently two of the things that the three of them wanted was to not be held in solitary confinement. Solitary is terrible. You might say, wow, for what these folks did, I'm not that offended by solitary confinement for them, however mentally anguishing it is. And the other thing that they wanted apparently was to be more in touch with their families or relatives or something like that. And you can see these relatives saying, look, I'm not in touch with my father, son, wife, grandchild, grandparent who died on 9/11. No, I'm really not very sympathetic to that. They want to have more contact with their family. But there are all these kind of details. And I think that one of the reasons it's not transparent is I think that people will be even more, right, Mark?
Sure.
They'll be even more offended when they see the details. And if they do have a guarantee of no solitary confinement, or they have more contact with their relatives, something like that, people are going to say, like I just said, where's my contact with my relatives?
Sure. I want to get to Rudy Giuliani in a moment and his new deal around bankruptcy. But first, I wanted to get to a law that has just gone into effect in Louisiana. And it's interesting and instructive for what might happen elsewhere in the country. It's a law that makes bystanders who film police in the middle of an arrest or the middle of any kind of police action, anybody who films them is subject to arrest themselves. I say film, I mean video on, in all the ways you can video, generally with a phone. It's pretty draconian. And, I'll mention George Floyd. We wouldn't know about the nature of the George Floyd details were it not for those citizen journalists or voyeurs, whatever you want to call them. I wonder if you can give me a word on this, David. It's interesting. It's Louisiana, so it's a deeply conservative place, but...
Well, Louisiana, if you remember Streetcar Named Desire, when Stanley Kowalski is explaining that the laws of Louisiana aren't like the laws of the other state. And it sure seems like Louisiana, they have a different legal tradition, and they seem to come up with not only these very conservative laws, but what's the word they're using now for Trump and Vance? Weird. They seem to come up with these sort of weird legal things. And I don't see how they could enforce this. If you're obstructing an investigation, or you're being told by an officer to stand back like 10 feet, it seems to me that those may or may not be lawful, depending how they execute it, right?
Well, just to interrupt for a second, the law will make it a misdemeanor for anyone, including journalists, to be within 25 feet of a law enforcement officer if the officer orders them back. So go ahead.
That's the part that if all you're adding to the alleged criminal or misdemeanor conduct is that the person is filming, it seems to me that, especially for a journalist, that just flies right in the face of the First Amendment, which does apply to the state. So when the police officer who's acting for the state tells somebody that you cannot stand in a public place and film something, if they don't have a right to stand there, they don't have a right to stand there. But as I said, I don't think it adds anything to any misdemeanor that you're also filming. So I think the law will be struck down as applied to anybody who is just filming. And I think especially to an accredited journalist, I think they'll probably bring a test case the first time that some accredited journalist, otherwise you have the issue of who's a journalist, who's a bystander with
Sure.
interest, and all that. But certainly any accredited journalist, somebody with a press pass. So I think this one's kind of dead on arrival. I think the police unions fight for this, and I think it's really foolish. This is where the police look bad and look like they're being authoritarian and not just keeping the peace and helping the people.
They also, I mean, to speak on behalf of the journalists involved, what's 25 feet? It's whatever the cops want it to be. I mean, at that moment, in other words, it's a little the Wild West. I always say that to people dealing with police officers anyway. I deal with police officers with great respect. I think that's a good way to deal with them. They have a tough job, etc. But I would say that it's the Wild West. Anything that they want to have happen out there can happen, and you can adjudicate it later, but it can go sideways in a hurry before you ever get to any kind of adjudication. So anyway, back to the 25 feet. What's 25 feet? It's whatever that cop wants to say it is, and he can grab you. And now he essentially has stopped the action that he wanted to stop, which is you videoing the event. So in the short term, until it is challenged in the ways that you suggest, it seems to me like it's really a win for the cops to essentially shut down not only citizen journalists, but journalism across the board.
Mark, I just don't think it's going to really have teeth. I mean, it's just very hard to imagine how it. And then, of course, you have on film when they make you step back because everything's being filmed, including the police effort to enforce this, and that's going to look even worse. I think if the cops thought this through, you know, if they're not performing their tasks in a way that they want them to be filmed, they're doing something wrong. That's what the body cams are all about. If you're not doing something that can be filmed and shown to the world, you need to think about it. You know, when I became an assistant U.S. attorney, my boss said to me, assume everything that you do is going to be on the front page of the LA Times. And if you're doing something you don't want to be on the front page of the LA Times, don't do it.
Now to Rudy Giuliani. He's agreed to a deal to end his personal bankruptcy case. Court filings are showing that this guy, who is the ex-personal attorney for Donald Trump, I'll remind everybody, he's agreed to pay $100,000 in cash, as well as use proceeds from the sale of one of his luxury apartments in either New York or Florida to pay off the remaining debt. This is to formally end his Chapter 11 case. And it means that, you know, this guy who's facing a string of money difficulties, David, will not be forced to answer questions about financial circumstances in any kind of bankruptcy court. So it's interesting because the bankruptcy judge threw out the bankruptcy case and criticized Giuliani. You'll remember we talked about it on this show because he wasn't complying with court orders and he wasn't being transparent. So what's happening here? I mean, he has a $148 million bill that he has to pay in that defamation case with Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. How does this help that?
Well, it's very complicated, and I think his goal in going into bankruptcy court with this enormous mountain of debt was to pay, let's say, 1 cent on the dollar, including to these two women down in Georgia who suffered so much at his hands and on account of his big defamatory mouth, Giuliani. And basically caused a campaign of terror against these two ladies who were doing nothing more than doing their civic duty to work as poll workers. So it was all awful. But I think his goal was to pay 1 cent on the dollar. And then there are also some preferred creditors. So maybe he could pay like his lawyers or something like that, a little more than 1 cent on the dollar. That didn't come to fruition. That didn't work at all. He never got out of the bankruptcy court with what he wanted, which was a discharge. The idea of a discharge in bankruptcy, Mark, is a fresh start. So his goal was to pay everyone 1 cent, walk away, be able to make a lot of money in the future after his fresh start and keep the money. Okay, that he didn't get. He got dismissed from bankruptcy, which is what the judge did. He dismissed him from bankruptcy. Now, this last minute thing, as I understand it, $100,000 goes to his own attorneys. So, of course, he was more than happy to somehow get that $100,000 to pay his own attorneys and not have these ladies who have $148 million judgment say, no, we get our fair share of that. You don't pay your lawyers $100,000. That didn't happen. Now, apparently this apartment that he owns, this condo, there's one in New York that's worth over $5 million and one in Florida that's worth over $3 million. From the articles I saw, it wasn't clear whether he pledged both of them. It looked like he pledged one of them, and I would assume it would be to pay those ladies because they seem like the most valid claimants in all of this. So I think what's happened to him, and without getting too much into the weeds, is I think these ladies are going to get most of the proceeds of the sale of the New York apartment. Meanwhile, they can put a lien on it, so he can't play games, Trump-like games where some trust in Russia that owns another trust in Cyprus that owns this, that owns that, try to put it beyond the reach of collection of those ladies. I think they're getting that proceeds pretty much firmly, Mark. His lawyers, Giuliani's lawyers, are getting $100,000. He's now discharged from bankruptcy. He has no protection from bankruptcy. Everybody else can sue him. They can do what they want. They can take his deposition in those civil cases, but the bankruptcy thing is over, which means he doesn't have a very, intrusive, very smart, very conscientious trustee in bankruptcy driving him crazy. He won't have that. Someone like what's his name, Madoff. Remember, Madoff had that tremendous.
But he will. He's lost the cloak of bankruptcy, or is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
He's got no protection. So if they find something of his that's worth $5 million, and they go grab that thing, there's a third apartment that we don't know about. Somebody finds it, it's held in some trust, they can relate it to Giuliani. They can go grab that right away, and Giuliani cannot go into bankruptcy court. I think it's sort of res judicata now. It's a decided case that he is discharged and doesn't have access to the bankruptcy courts. I don't know if they could try to play some game and he could go bankrupt in some other district, but I don't think so. I think this has what we call a preclusive effect, and he's done with bankruptcy, which means he's done with having a bankruptcy trustee needling him, but he's also done with any protection. So somebody can put a lien or a levy on something, and that's it. That's it. He can either beat that person in court like those ladies from Georgia, or they just collect. There's no bankruptcy protection he can seek. I think that's where he stands right now, and he's going to take his chances. The Florida thing, there's all kinds of bankruptcy protections. We think that's why OJ went to Florida. We think that's why a lot of people go to Florida. They have these huge bankruptcy protections. They can kind of go to their creditors, I know I did wrong. I know I did stuff I shouldn't have done. I know I cheated you, but Florida is a on your creditor state, and we think that's why a lot of scamsters go there and try to get that protection.
Well, Rudy has certainly proven the kind of guy he is. What he did to those two poll workers is just devastating and obscene, and I wish he would do time for it, but sadly the legal system is inadequate, and it's been such that he's been able to drag it out, but at least they'll recover something, is your point.
I think, Mark, if he played enough games with his assets, I think he might be charged in a criminal court, maybe a federal court, with money laundering. For money laundering, people don't understand it. You have to have a crime. And once you have a crime and you get money from it, then a second crime is laundering money. Laundering money doesn't sort of just stand out there, on its own. But I think there's certainly a crime that you could connect to Giuliani if a federal prosecutor were aggressive about it. So I think Giuliani ought to really give him some free advice on your show. Don't play games and try and send that money offshore or transfer it around or something like that, because I think he could be federally, criminally prosecuted. I think he's standing on two banana peels.
Mr. Katz, it's asking, Brian says, Mark, ask Mr. Katz, what is the blue glob or globe on the table that is turning and over his right shoulder? What is that?
It's a globe that I got at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. Good institution, worth supporting, and I bought it at retail to help support the museum, and I have it on my desk.
Yeah, there you go. All right, that's it for the press.
I never explained the things behind me, but that's the federal judge that I clerked for in Washington, D.C.,
Sure.
John Garrett Penn. He's passed away by now, but that's a photo of him when he was in his early 50s. He made it to the federal bench as a U.S. district judge when he was 49 years old. So that's
I remember my dad talking about the judge that he clerked under, and the judge he clerked under was very much a part of our lives, even as a kid. I don't remember, I didn't know, I was a little kid, but I remember him speaking so fondly of him. Clearly, it's a kind of relationship, if it goes well, that is an enduring one, and as you grow into a career, that judge who was instrumental in crafting you in the early going, anyway, as a lawyer, really is appreciated, huh?
Well, it was a wonderful position for me to get as a young lawyer in Washington, D.C., and I'd actually turned down a clerkship in the Southern District of New York because it was for 2 years, and there were some other things, and I thought, do I really want to do this for 2 years? And then, there was a little gap, and I didn't know if I was going to get a clerkship with a federal judge. And a lot of the kids who were on the law review with me, were already signed up with a federal judge, either San Francisco or New York, Washington, some down here in LA. And then mine came through, and my judge was appointed by Carter. So I was his first full-time clerk. And then he had a wonderful case, the Abscam case. There were 4 or 5 different Congress members who got indicted by Carter. The joke on Carter was that he was so not politically astute that he only indicted Democrats. But there was, and of course, he didn't indict them at all. That's that view of the president having some huge power over the Department of Justice, which was non-existent. The Attorney General and the FBI saw fit to pursue the cases. But it was ironic that 5 of them were Democratic Congress members. Only 1 was a Republican. And my judge tried one of them in the 81 timeframe. And by that time, Reagan had won. It was an interesting year, Mark. It was like the year when Trump came to power and Obama left. This was Reagan coming to power in early 81. And then, everyone talking about the assassination attempt in Pennsylvania. Then in March of that same year, just 2 months later, at the Washington Hilton, which was right there in Washington, D.C., not that far from where the clerkship was at the U.S. courthouse, Reagan was very seriously wounded in that attack.
Yeah, and from that attack, though, you got some gun legislation that has since expired, but from
the Brady
this
bill.
most,
The Brady bill
Brady
for
bill,
his
but from
famous,
this,
his aide who got
Sure.
even worse wounded in that he was,
Yeah.
I think, in a wheelchair, wasn't he, Mark?
yeah, I
For the
mean, he
rest
was
of his life.
really damaged for life, exactly. So that was one of the positive things that came from this horrible event. But the latest with the president or former president, there is no even talk of gun legislation. David, thank you. So appreciate your time, and I look forward to next week. It's a wild time in America. I think we all need a lawyer. I'm glad you're ours. David Katz is my 3rd favorite Katz after my 2 kitties. Oh, Trevor Starr with a 10.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be with your audience. And keep the comments coming. I always look at them. After I've
Big
been on.
shout out.
Yeah.
Great to be with all of you.
Yeah. People love you, David Katz. So thank you. David Katz, everybody. See you, David. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.